Hey AONE fans, Tim here, and in this video we are going to show you how Itential can help make network automation not just easy, but drag and drop easy.
All right, AONE fans, AJ here, and I'm also joined by Tim. Tim, how you doing?
Doing well, AJ. How are you?
I am very excited for what we're about to see and the journey we're about to go on. We are joined this evening by Rich Martin, Senior Technical Marketing Engineer with Itential. Rich, thank you so much for joining us.
Oh, you're very welcome. It's nice to meet you, AJ and Tim. Thanks for having me on.
Absolutely. I understand we're going on a bit of a journey with you tonight.
We are. So if you, hopefully the viewers and listeners have or will listen to the accompanying podcast with Peter Spragata, our VP of product management, where he kind of discussed a lot of the elements of the Itential platform. And so today, I want to kind of walk you through all of those elements. And the best way to do it is to take a practitioner's point of view as a network engineer, kind of struggling with this whole network automation thing that's going on in our world, and show you, like, one of the things is we want to meet customers where they're at. And a lot of times where customers are at is at the very beginning of the network automation journey. So what that means is, I might have some Ansible playbooks. I might have grabbed some Python scripts. I don't maybe understand exactly how they work, but somebody gave them to me or found them somewhere, and I'm playing around with them. And maybe for very simple things like creating an interface, or maybe even before you create something, you look at something, right? You do a bunch of show stuff and then you correlate that together. But they're starting somewhere, right? And one of the difficulties with kind of describing our platform is the fact that we do so much really cool stuff very, very quickly for network practitioners. It's easy to get overwhelmed. So I want to start with, like, what does the world of, a typical network engineer look like today when he thinks automation, right? And we start with, like, what do I have? Do I have a playbook? Do I have a script? So where we really start is, how do we take an existing automation asset, whether it be an Ansible playbook, a script of some sort. When we talk to network practitioners, what do they already have? Because one of the worst things you can do is say, hey, you've got some automation, throw it all away, start all over. Like, that's not a really good way to resonate with somebody who's just trying to get into the automation game. So Let's identify the things that you already have, right? And say, in our platform, there's a way to use that, and then to kind of augment it and grow it out. So the first stop in our journey is with a part of our solution called Automation Gateway. Now, Peter talked a little bit about this. It's got a couple of roles, but one of the primary roles that we'll talk about here today is literally a place where you can onboard your network automations. In this case, if you look on the left-hand side, we support onboarding Ansible playbooks. And we have several here that are just kind of, for our demo purposes, and bringing in those playbooks so that they can become part of the overall platform. Because what I want to show you is, like, how we build network automations in our canvas in a low code environment, but how we can integrate the things that they already have, as complex or as simple as they may be, into that platform. And it starts here with Automation Gateway. So this is where we say, okay, what automations do you have? You got playbooks? Fantastic. We can bring them into the system. They'll show up here, as well as other assets, roles, collections. We can actually onboard devices that are part of an existing Ansible deployment that you have. And then, of course, here's something that's very interesting. All of the Ansible modules, network and otherwise, that are kind of already built into the Ansible ecosystem become also directly available inside of our platform.
Oh,
so,
wow. Okay.
So when we bring in Ansible, we're bringing the whole thing in.
Gotcha.
And so that it can be leveraged and used.
That's one thing I wanted to ask, Rich, is when you say you bring in Ansible, are you actually bringing in the playbooks and modules into the Automation Gateway, or is the Automation Gateway linking via an API and just is it the orchestrator of Ansible itself? How does that work?
We're bringing it into the automation gateway. And I'm glad you brought that up because we are going to kind of API-ify things as we go along. That is actually the whole point of this is, if we're looking at how we scale automation safely across an enterprise, there's a lot of pieces and parts that go to that. And that includes like, how do we create APIs on top of scripts or on top of automations in our platform so that they can be leveraged in other places. And then as they're being used, how do we ensure that we have like guardrails and safeguards? I call them guardrails and safety nets. Things before you run it in automation, things you check after, or in network engineer parlance, pre-check, post-check. So that's the point. So the journey starts with, okay, let's take a look at what you got. You've got Ansible, because that's kind of like the de facto standard. We run into a lot of folks that have a lot of interesting Ansible stuff and usable Ansible stuff. But really, it could be anything. And like kind of the bucket for, all kinds of stuff is, do you have a script? What is it written in? Can it run in Linux? Then we can run it, right? We can onboard it into here. And I'll draw your attention because this is the script we'll be using right now. This is a Python script called netmiko create interface. We can actually look at the script, and that may be hard to see, but essentially we just nabbed this off of Cisco DevNet. It's just a script there. We figure like hundreds, maybe thousands of people have this somewhere laying around. They may not be using it. Maybe they are, who knows? But it's something anybody can grab. And the first thing we look at is, this is just a regular Python script. But if you were to run this from the command line, it's going to require a set of arguments, right? And looking at the script, you can kind of point them out right here. It's asking for like the first argument is some sort of interface name. In this case, we're going to be doing loopback interfaces because we're in a demo lab. What is the port description? What IP address do you want to put on there? And then what's the net mask? I mean, fairly routine things when you want to bring an interface up, right? But the knowledge of, hey, when I run this script, so AJ, if this was your script and you were giving it off to Tim, if he just ran it, wouldn't work. You'd have to explain, well, you need to put this on the command line, that, and then, I'm sure Tim would get it. But that becomes part of the parameters list that we can create. Now, we're going to turn this into something that becomes API accessible and a kind of a drag and drop element within our Automation Studio platform in a minute. But the first part of that is bring the script into the system so that we can identify it. And then I've already kind of pre-filled all this out here, but I'll show you what this looks like. We call this decorating a script. And all it really is, it's a JSON formatted object that describes the command line properties and the order that they need to be entered in, so that this actually becomes part of creating an API. Because for the API, there's got to be a set of inputs into whatever you're going to execute, and this is how we define it. And it comes straight from the script. So you create these four elements: interface name, description, the IP address, and the net mask, and then we can define the order. And there's all kinds of, if this is a script that uses like dash, instead of IP, instead of a particular order, for like the first element here is interface name. Maybe it's a -i / interface, or -i space interface name. We have all kinds of ways to accommodate all of those kind of methodologies of passing information on the command line. But these are just command line elements. So once those are defined, if you actually execute the script, we can do that and kind of test it here from Automation Gateway. I can choose a host, which in this case is a router, and then give it interface name, description, IP. This is built by that decoration that we just created, right? So I can kind of test that here and make sure it works. And actually, it's more than just testing. It actually runs the script and executes it. So this, if I filled this out, would create an interface based off of the information that I entered in here. So this is kind of like a form, right? Being able to enter a form here. But once we're finished with that, because this is integrated with our Automation Studio, which I'll get to in a minute, this script becomes just a task and a workflow, a step in a workflow, if you will, on the canvas. And so I'll kind of pause there to see if there's any questions, because I know I covered a lot in this, but I wanted to say, hey, we got to start with, what automation assets do you have, and how do we onboard them into the system so that we can show you the value of not only bringing them into the system, but how to augment and grow this automation out?
Well, first off, that form doesn't get much more user friendly than that. I mean, just descriptive, fill it out. But
I'm going to show you something even better, Tim.
All right, I'm looking forward to it. But the only other thing that I would add is I see Automation Gateway as being really kind of a collaboration tool as well, because you could have organizations that have practitioners that their go-to's Ansible. Some just like to run straight up Python scripts, and to really be able to bring all of those in to orchestrate with the different tools within Itential, I think is really powerful.
Yeah, that's absolutely correct. And we run into that quite a bit. I mean, there's the guy in one team that he's the Python guy, right? And he's doing his thing and he's got his scripts, but somebody over here in another group, or maybe even in the same team, is doing something in Ansible, and he's got a bunch of playbooks that are really useful to him. Not only do we want to accommodate that, we want to kind of cross-pollinate and say, hey, do you know what the Python guy's got over here? Do you see what the Ansible? And just by doing that and letting people see those scripts and understand them, kind of fosters, the collaboration, like you said. And hey, I'm interested in seeing how that works. Like, for instance, I have, we have an Ansible playbook that does the exact same thing here. So in a demo, we could swap those things out. So it's interesting to even see, well, if I'm an Ansible guy, how does that work over in Python world? And so being able to see those kind of things and see what people are working on does foster more collaboration and maybe like an interest in seeing how to do it in other ways.
Rich, I wanted to ask, with Ansible, if somebody's already got like something going with Ansible, they've already established a bunch of playbooks, they've got their inventory, can you ingest all of that in so you don't have to rebuild your inventory from scratch, like especially if you have a larger network?
Yes, we can. Absolutely.
Now, you also mentioned, is Automation Gateway, can it be seen as the repository for the different tools and scripts, and then the automation platform is going to be the orchestrator of those different tasks?
That's a great way to look at it.
Okay.
Correct. And without getting too far beyond that, Automation Gateway has some other functions as well. One of those is, like, for instance, in the Ansible side of things, we can onboard an inventory of network devices. In addition to the Ansible playbooks and scripts, those network devices also become part of a federated inventory in our platform. So everything that kind of Automation Gateway brings into it, kind of ingests into it, becomes part of something that can be used in our automation platform as well, including inventory. Okay, so we've got this. So now we're going to transition. So I do want to say Automation Gateway has several functions. We've kind of hit on a couple of them here that are kind of relevant to what we're doing. But it's a different server. It's a different piece of software than the automation platform, but it integrates with it.
Does the Automation Gateway live on premises, in cloud?
Yes.
Yeah. Oh, I see.
Just like everything nowadays,
right,
it could be anywhere. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Typically on-prem, especially if this becomes the gateway for a bunch of CLI devices that you want to be able to use inside of our platform on-prem, but it can be run in the cloud. We've got instances in our own demo in the cloud. And so it can be, utilized there. No problem.
Okay. I just, automatically when you say gateway, I think, okay, this must be something that's on-prem that allows you to connect to devices while you're operating from the cloud, from the studio in the cloud.
That would be a correct assumption based off of where it's normally seen. Okay, so I'm gonna flip us over to the Itential Automation Platform. So we've got several functions on the left-hand side. Automation Studio is kind of that drag and drop canvas we've talked about. So let's pop into there real quick. And I'm gonna pull up. I threw together some of these demos for AONE. I just created a simple task with that script in there. So if you recall, netmiko create interface.py was what this was in the Automation Gateway, as I flip quickly back and forth without context. I'm back in Automation Gateway just to show you that this is indeed that same script manifested here now inside of the gateway, and I populated inside a task box. And what that normally looks like is I can insert a node here, which is a task, and then I select what I want to be in that task. And so, for instance, this task can be an API call from any system that's been integrated into the platform. So if you want to think about like any kind of like a SD-WAN controller, all of the API tasks that are part of like that controller's API, published API spec, those become pieces. Each one of those becomes something that I can pop into a step or a node or a task here. So your script becomes one. I could, there's a bunch of internal like workflow based things like loops and things like that become tasks as well. And this is how we start to build this out. But in its simplest form, I could just run this script like this. There was this Ansible playbook called Create iOS Interface that does the exact same thing as this Python Create interface. It's the exact same thing, but now I can start to pull any of those automations, whether it's Ansible or Python, and start bringing them into an automation here. So I haven't seen much of this, but I imagine if a network engineer had a bunch of Ansible playbooks or even Python scripts that could be used one after another, they could be situated on our, in a workflow like this. And the cool thing that I'm going to show you in a minute too is how do you manipulate data between tasks? Because if you think about it as a practitioner, we do that in a manual way, right? I might do a show interface, get an IP address from that, and then go over somewhere else, and then copy paste that somewhere else and use that. But in the world of automation, how do we extract information from one task or one API call, manipulate it so that it can be used in the very next task or maybe in a subsequent task somewhere else? And that's where we start to expand things. So I'll show you that in a minute. But this is just simply, I can now bring in anything over Automation Gateway, pop it into the canvas, and I can start using it.
And that's, Rich, that's what I think is really interesting about this is I think we as network practitioners, when we think automation, we typically think, well, how do I quickly and efficiently implement this change? But what the automation platform from Itential brings is it really brings that end-to-end automation, because implementing a change, that's really just a small piece of it. There's a lot of pre-work and post-work that go into it. You may need to open a change with an ITSM. You may want to disable monitoring from your NMS platform and then re-enable it once it's done. And this drag and drop scope within Automation Studio, you can really build it out to handle all those tasks, not just the specific change itself. And I think that's really interesting.
Yeah, and by the end of this, you'll see how we've done this. But to your point though, all of that becomes kind of the bigger picture of automation. But a lot of times we have to start with that very kind of centralized piece, that script that does something. Because even if I'm writing the code, even if and that is my background, I'm a programmer that turned network engineer that said, hey, I could write automation code in Python. And then you quickly realize how hard it is. And now you're not doing fun things like automating network stuff. Now you're doing things like, how does a ServiceNow API work? And I'm going to sit here and write code to integrate ServiceNow that's only useful for this one script. And I'm a network guy that can tolerate writing Python code. Now I have to go wade through the inner workings of ServiceNow. And that's just one application. What if I have to get something from Netbox or Infoblocks? What if I have to do DNS updates? Now I have to write that for all of that. That's way beyond what I want to do as a network engineer who wants to do, who wants to write Python code for automation, And so that you're right. That becomes a big problem even if you're trying to write the code yourself. You quickly find out how big this scope is just to bring all this stuff together, not to mention data manipulation between all of this. And so you're right. We'll show you this in a minute. But here's the other thing I want to show you. If I go back to the NetMiko script that we onboarded, I told you we kind of API-ified that thing, right? And all we did was I created a definition of the command line arguments that were needed. And so this is a one-for-one mapping. So by defining that decoration, now within Automation Studio, I am required in order to use this task to have these fields filled out. Right. So again, this is like what you were saying. There was a form there, but now that form is part of the API call. That's a requirement here. And I've statically assigned these values. We'll see in this next bit that we'll do it with another form within the platform. So that's kind of the first step. We start here with this script. Now, if I load up demo 2 here, I'm going to ask you just to overlook all this other stuff for right now because it's not as complex as it looks. this is where we started with, right? This humble little script that has now made its way into something a little bit bigger than what it was. What I've done here is I've added 2 guardrails and a safety net. And I'm going to explain that in a minute. One of the things about this particular Python script in particular, but I would guess for many of them, is if we actually look at how it's written, it has no pre-existing knowledge of any network standards. It has really, outside of probably some very general CLI syntax checking in the NetMiko library, it probably has no other guardrails whatsoever in it. Right? So if a network engineer runs this script, they are the pre-check, they are the post-check, they're doing all the sanity checking. So this is not a good way to scale automation across the network, is give everybody your script and say, go run it. If we're really going to get to the point where we want to scale network automation, we've got to build the guardrails in. So that's what the rest of this piece of this is. It's building some guardrails in, and I'm going to show you in a moment what this validation call is, and then this will look familiar: a pre-check and a post-check. All right. So the validation check will actually take us to another part of the Itential platform. So if I go to the main section here of the platform, kind of the home screen, I want to take us to Configuration Manager. Now, there's quite a few things in Configuration Manager, but the piece that's important about this is defining compliance standards, or just if you will, even if you don't want to think about it as compliance standards, because that just bites off a lot of stuff when you say the word compliance. How about this? How about let's just get some standardization in our configurations for routers. That's it. Like, I look at it that simply. So within there, we have the ability to define these golden configuration trees. And I've built one here. And so let me kind of walk you through this piece, and I'm going to show you how this all fits together. One of our kind of philosophies is if you're going to do automation, especially at scale, you've got to have standardization. You've got to have ways to do pre-checks, post-checks, compliance checking of all sorts. So if you've got, like, if you think about kind of the tools, the legacy tools that we're doing, compliance and configuration templates and things like that, very, very limited in how you could automate them. And so with our platform, we believe like that whole concept of building compliance and golden configuration templates is a key component to automation. You really, they're two parts of a whole. You can't really separate them, because if I want to unleash automation across the network, we've got to have a way to define what the standards need to look like. And then we've got to have a way to pre-check and post-check and roll back and do all that fun stuff. Otherwise, it's just like giving everybody a Python script and saying, hey, go run it. That's a scary thought, right?
Right.
So one of the things we've built into the platform is the ability to do golden configuration templates, not only on CLI devices, but actually on API as well. Because if you think about something that's driven by API, like cloud network services, something as simple as an AWS VPC, you can pull its configuration. All its configuration is when we bring it into our platform, it's an expression of a JSON object. In fact, I'll give you an example before we go elsewhere here. So this federated inventory is available throughout the whole platform. It just shows up in Configuration Manager because this is the section of our platform where we manage configuration. But I can pull up, I think this one's a valid one right now. I can pull up an AWS VPC that we have onboarded into the system, and that's a service. That's not a physical device. It has no true CLI, but we can do a series of API calls that gives us a full description of everything that's configured for this. And one of the really cool things is, network ACLs operate, or security groups operate a lot like firewall rules. And so we can take this just like we can take a CLI and build a golden configuration template on it. And instead of like pulling a configuration and comparing it and seeing what's valid, what's not valid, what's correct and not correct, we're doing API calls to these services and doing those same sort of comparisons. So this is applicable to everything. The idea here is we want to do configuration compliance and golden configurations across the entire network, whether it's cloud, whether it's on-prem CLI-based or on-prem API managed. It should all be done, and then being able to automate all of that as well and bring it into your automations.
Rich, you mentioned creating these golden configuration trees. How do you typically see customers implement these golden configuration hierarchies? Do they go by region of devices? Do they go by device in a hierarchy kind of thing? How is that typically built out?
Typically regions of devices. So that they ought to be all like devices, certainly, right? Because if we're going to drive configuration standards, we got to do that across like devices. But typically it's a kind of a regional or geographically based. It could be based off of, somebody's domain of presence or their domain of administration. Because I might be in charge of a particular data center in Atlanta and I can build out a tree there. There might be somebody on the West Coast that's in charge of San Francisco. They could have their own tree. Ideally, there are certain things in the tree that we should probably share as best practices. Let me show you one. So the way we do our configuration trees is I can have as many child, nodes off of the base node. So the base node is global data centers. I can actually apply configurations here, and you'll see I've already put one in. IP HTTP server. That's actually a horrible thing to put in into your configuration and make it mandatory, right? Yeah. So the way this rule stands right now is this is a required rule for all of the devices that will be applied to this tree. So this will be part of their standard. So obviously that's a horrible thing. So we have the ability to kind of select some rules. It shouldn't be required. It should be disallowed. Now we feel a lot better about ourselves, right? The cool thing about that is once I've applied it to the global data center, which it gets inherited into everything under it. So if I go to London, you'll see that it's inherited the blue, which is the to disallow the IP HTTP server. And then I can start from here and build out golden configurations for just the London branch and still inherit. So under global data centers, I should have all the things that are more globally relevant to all of my device configurations for a router in a data center. And again, we can have multiple tree structures. I've seen just in testing up to like 14 or 16 child levels there. Usually in practice, we don't usually see more than 3 or 4. But that's the way you do it. And so one of the easiest ways to get started building kind of your CLI configuration, golden configuration, is literally just to pull, like, which one of our network devices do I think is closest to a good standard in some way, shape, form, or fashion, and just pull the configuration in directly from that and then start editing. So in this case, it's pulling a London core router configuration into here, and then I'll start chopping it up and building some standards around interfaces. Or actually, in this case, we're going to look at how bad or how the lack of standard in an interface looks.
So I just want to comment on that, because if you start with Ansible and you want to build a golden config, you have to build the playbook. You can't have Ansible go fetch a config off a device and then build a playbook. It doesn't work like that, right? So right. I think that this is really cool that you can use Ansible, pull that into the Itential platform, and then use Itential to go build your golden standard configuration.
There you go. Yeah. So it just pulled in that config, and I'm just going to chop off everything but loopback. Just that's the example we're looking at here. And really what I'm showing you is like, there's no standards here. It's all over the place. And we ought to have standards. Like every interface is Itential. That's interface description. That, for a practitioner, especially like I used to work at a service provider, like we had to have port descriptions that had some sort of useful information to help us troubleshoot, or at least avoid having to look things up that could be in the port description, right, to help us do some troubleshooting. And of course, then you hit that nirvana state where it's like everything is up to date, and then eventually somebody reuses a port, doesn't change the description, and it's no longer valid, right? But the point being here is, we can pull these things in, and now we can start to iterate and figure out what this needs to look like as far as a standard looks like. So in this case, this is only really applicable to a single router. The intent of this is to be able to build golden configurations that are applicable to many routers. So if I go here to Atlanta, we've kind of iterated a bit on this, and now we're introducing regular expression matches so that we can build a more generalized rule for, in this case, loopback interfaces. So what we've done here is in these kind of curly braces, they designate this as a regular expression. to treat it as a regular expression inside those. And so what we've basically said here is in this Atlanta node for global data centers, we inherit the no IP, the IP HTTP server, disallow, but specifically a loopback interface needs to be in the 300 range. That's just our standard, right? For instance, it must have a description that starts with ATL, some sort of character here. It could be a dash, could be a space, the text service, and then ideally some sort of service identifier number, something after it, right? We want to have something there. And then since subnets are important in networks, especially if you have an IP address that's not routed to a particular part of the network, that's important. So we know ahead of time that the standard here is, loopback interfaces need to be in 10.10.30 dot something, right, with an appropriate net mask. And so now we've built a standard for the Atlanta routers, at least for loopbacks. We can continue to iterate this over time, but it's a good place to get started, especially when we have a script that's going to be able to create loopback interfaces. So this becomes part of our guardrails when we define the standard. Now we're going to integrate that into that automation that I showed you earlier. But once we have this built, it's a simple copy and paste. And now San Francisco can be in there, but they're in the 200 range for the loopback IPs. The descriptions are slightly different, right? We want SFO instead of ATL, and their IP address range is going to be different here as well. And so now we can iterate that through there and quickly build standards for different features and functions for our routers in the global data center.
All right, Rich. So we've got golden configurations. We've got standardized configs. Within Configuration Manager, what does remediation look like? So let's take that HTTP server example. Somebody goes into a device and enables IP HTTP server. Is there an alarm or an alert that goes off? Then we go in and push the change back. Is there automated remediation? What are our options?
So our options within the Configuration Manager. So this is kind of it integrates with Automation Studio. Like, in fact, every click, every feature, every function is actually an API call that can be used in Automation Studio, but this can be used standalone. And so you could actually have a team here building golden configurations and running compliance checks on devices as well. And when there's a compliance check that's run, it'll actually tell you what's out of compliance, and we do a single click remediation from here. So somebody could actually be in here running that. Now, that's not ideal. We should be able to now take all of the work that's done here and turn it into an automation and then schedule an automation that runs to do compliance checks. And then within the automation itself, we still have the ability to leverage the Configuration Manager feature of auto remediation. Or actually, what we think is probably a better idea is to identify the severity of that particular compliance, those lines that are out of compliance, and determine whether it's okay to do an auto remediation. There may be things we don't want to touch until maintenance window, or we need a human doing this on a maintenance window, right? So that's why moving from Configuration Manager, leveraging all the work that's done here, and then moving from Configuration Manager into Automation Studio, where we start to build automations that can do all of that, that's where it really gets interesting. Because then, like I said, then we could say, it's okay to maybe change kind of low priority things in a configuration as part of an auto remediation, but a severity or a score because we have the ability to do some scoring as well within the remediation checks, but something that scores high in severity, let's not touch that, or let's open a ticket for that, or let's have a senior guy put some eyeballs on that, or let's batch it up and do all those things during the next maintenance window. And all that's possible once you go into the Automation Studio piece and start building those workflows around that.
So when someone's building a workflow within Automation Studio, is it common to run these compliance checks as like pre and post checks as part of an automation?
Yes, absolutely. Let's move back into Automation Studio because I want to show you exactly what that looks like. But the answer is they better be. they better be, because that's what these features are for, right? To put these pre and post checks in. And when we go to Automation Studio, we have a variety of ways for network teams, network engineers to start building robust pre and post checks. So what we just did, so the way we normally think about a compliance check, it's like some change has already been made to a router, and now we have to like run some check on the router to make sure if the change is still in compliance. And that's okay. We need that. But a better way to do it would be, before a change is made to a device, if I know what the CLI commands for that change look like, can I ask the same compliance engine, if I were to hypothetically apply this to this particular device, would it break anything? would it cause would it defy a standard that we have created? And that's actually the feature we call validation within the platform. So we can do a compliance check, which is more of like an after the fact thing. The network's been changed. Let's make sure the change is still, is or is not in compliance. In this case, if we're going to run an automation, I don't want to make the change first and then find out it's broken. I want to do as much as possible beforehand to ensure that if I were to make that change, it doesn't, at the very least, it doesn't go against some compliance rule that's created in the golden configuration. And that's exactly what this is. This validate network change. It's going to take the CLI structure of that script, and it's going to feed it back into the golden configuration engine and say, we're about to apply this to this device. What do you think about that? and those loopback standard that we built is what it's going to compare it to. So I'll show you what that looks like in real time. It's the easiest if we just run it. So from the Automation Studio, I can run this application or this automation. And if I click start, I can view the job. So this takes us to a different part of the Automation Studio, the automation platform. Job Manager, where actually operations are done on jobs and we can view them. The very first thing that happens here, though, is it's going to ask me to work a manual task. This manual task, Tim, is an even greater form. You remember the form way back in Automation Gateway days? Okay, so I've created a form here, and in this form, it's better because now I can define things like drop downs, right? So now I can limit the input that gets put into here and say, I only want you to select of these devices, and this can be statically created or actually can be dynamically created. I can iterate. I can do an API call that says, show me all the devices currently in Atlanta or currently in the federated device inventory in Atlanta, and I can populate that drop down.
I love that. Do not give people free text forms if you don't have to.
That's right. Exactly. So in order to make it really, really, really easy, like everything in here is compliant. So now you can just make basic changes, right? And not have to worry about that. But yeah, we can create forms, and these forms that can actually operate as a form of validation themselves, of input validation. So there's an entire way of doing that within our platform. In this case, everything in here is compliant if I apply this to those rules that we created, but I'm going to make it non-compliant so that we can see the validation piece work. So I'm going to run that. Now it's going to run the rest of the automation. We can do a visualization here. The visualization looks a little different from where we create it in the studio. Oh, wow. Gives us the colors and everything give us a little bit more of an idea of what's going on. But that first check here was validate network change, if you recall that. So that's that task that says, before I even apply this, I'm going to ask the configuration manager for this device, for this golden config, I'm going to pass to it, and this will look familiar. I'm going to pass to it, let's see here, this configuration line. This is what the script is going to execute if we allow it to. Interface 301. So that data for the interface name and the loopback interface, the description, all of that came from the form. We pulled that in, created the CLI commands that are going to be used by the script, and now before running it, we're passing it to the validation engine, and it came back, did the decision, said no thank you, there's an error here, and then this blue task means it's manual. It's actually stopping the workflow. This is useful for a number of reasons. For doing demos, things move really quickly, so sometimes we need to stop it. In this case, we want to stop it to kind of illustrate what it's telling me, and it says basically the validation check has failed. The proposed configuration change failed because of this rule right here. This is the golden configuration. So I changed the description. It no longer matches the ATL service requirements. And so therefore it said, nope, we're not going to do that change. So if I continue the task, it's going to take us down kind of the failure path here, which is, this is a revert and roll back task that could, do a number of things, but it's a fail out task and then takes us all the way to the end.
It's good to see a meaningful error message as well.
well, and you know what? That's something that we created so it could be meaningful. Exactly right. Because, and that's something you can do in the platform, right? You can structure, we can create, all kinds of text elements and pull data from different tasks, pull data from different, different IT systems and turn that into whatever needs to be shown to a user in order for them to react to something, especially if it's a fail out event, like something didn't happen according to the, to plan, giving them all that information. These kind of manual tasks are also good for just putting information in front of you before a change is made. So if it's like earlier we talked about, well, maybe we do a compliance check, but under certain circumstances, remediation needs to have some eyeballs on it, right? And under other circumstances, it's okay to do an auto remediation. Well, you can have a manual task here that stops the automation and it allows only specific, like, senior level network engineers to take a look at it, that, verify, yeah, that looks good, and then click OK, and then the thing continues. Otherwise, it's just going to sit there waiting for somebody to grab it because we don't want this thing to go automatic.
So it sounds like within the platform, there's some sort of like role-based authentication, right? Like you might have network engineers, senior network engineers, architects, or whatever, right? And you can put rules on who's allowed to run what or put together and make certain changes.
Absolutely correct. And that was the intent. The intent was, we recognize that, while this is a network, automation platform, there's a lot of teams within the networking team. There's a lot of different people. Maybe they're split up by different, network domains, or maybe there's network DevOps guys too. I've actually ran across one or two of those guys, and they can have a presence in the system as well. And maybe they're working on automations that are very specific to their network domains. The idea is being able to tie these things together. And one of the things that we kind of as a best practice is can you build workflows that are modular in the sense that they can be reused by other teams? So one of the modular workflows that we have, for instance, is like ServiceNow or Jira tickets, like opening these things up, because these things happen all the time, updating a ServiceNow or a Jira ticket, closing so we should make these things modular so that I can literally pop them into any automation at the beginning, at the end, and just use them very, very quickly without having to reinvent the wheel all over again. Yeah. And that's the same with network automations. It's any automation can be used as a modular workflow or child job within the platform. All right. So that was validation as one type of guardrail. I'm going to show you another type of guardrail really quickly, and this should resonate and be warm to your heart. This is called I call this a pre-check, and it's a form of pre-check, but really we're using something called a command template. So command templates are reusable functions and a function of the platform. And these can be used specifically with CLI devices. So draw your attention here. That looks like something you've probably seen in your past, a show interface command, right? So think about, like, I'm about to make a change. So in this case, that script does a loopback interface, right? Before I create the new loopback interface, I should probably check to see if it already exists. Because if it does exist, I might overwrite the IP, change the description, something like that. So that's all this does. We're passing the interface name variable from that form, that awesome form, Tim, into this command template. And this makes it really easy for a network engineer with their embedded knowledge of what they should be looking for to create, to put the command in that says show interface. In this case, it'll be like loopback 301, and then parse the output of it. So we create a rule here that says it should not contain interface name variable, which is loopback 301 is up. If the loopback is up, that means it already exists, right? So we should not see that. And just as long as we don't see that, then this pre-check condition is okay because that loopback doesn't exist. Similar to this, we've created a post-check condition, which is basically the same but inverted, right? Now that the pre-check condition ensured that the loopback didn't exist, The script runs the commands that now puts the loop back into existence. Now we can run a pre-check command or a post-check command that now says, do the same show interface command, but in this case, it must contain the interfaces up. And as a secondary check of that output of this command, we also want to make sure that the same IP address is applied, because just because the loop backs up, the IP is not up, then something's probably going to be broken, right? So we can layer this into as many commands or as many parses of the command output as needed. So in my mind, this is like I can sit down with a network engineer or myself, if I'm the network engineer, and go, before I make this particular change, what am I looking for? What are the CLI commands I'm looking for? Go directly to that device, run those show commands, and then parse out the thing that means the success criteria, right? And that's where you create your rule that says it needs to contain this, doesn't need to contain this. We can do regular expression matches, things like that. And now they can quickly start to build pre and post check conditions that they would normally do as part of their day-to-day job. So instead of them doing it, we're allowing them to transfer that knowledge into the platform without writing any code.
That's really cool. I mean, you got to have something in an automation that has some network language in it somewhere. So
that's right. Yeah, that's right. And the cool thing is these are reusable. We have a lot of customers that, like, a network engineer comes in and goes, I'm just going to like pound out a bunch of pre-checks and post-checks that I do all the time. Yeah, they're there as a palette of, a ton of stuff that now I can just pick from.
It's all based on variables too, right? So you can just build those different commands, and then each time you use it, you just look for the given interface or given variable that you're looking for at the time.
Yep. You're passing those variables into this command template check. And again, those variables from this particular run came from the form.
Oh,
that's
form,
where we
right.
inputted them. And so once they're inputted into the form, those variables can be now used anywhere else in the workflow that requires them. So in that case, I pass the variable for the interface name and the IP address from that form right into this, and then it just fills it in. And like I said, network engineers can just now focus purely on what are the commands, what am I looking for, and then feel confident now that we run these before a check. They would pass just like they would pass if it was my own fingers and eyeballs doing it. I think that's pretty much everything that's going on here. So like I say, there's two guardrails. Like the first one was the validation check. And for the CLI commands, the second guardrail to keep us out of on the road was the run command template pre-check, and then the safety net was the post-check. Now, I don't have another like fallout scenario for here just to keep things simple, but ideally around this, the result of this could be another fail out scenario where we handle a rollback because a change is made, something didn't get made right, and then we can do a rollback condition. But for simplicity, we just left it at this. But ideally, in a real world, you would want to fill that out. But that's just simply showing how to use these command templates for any network engineer to get started. And you can build out your pre-check, your post-check conditions as robust as you want. They can be entire workflows unto themselves if you wanted to do that. This is simply the journey and how to get started.
So Rich, in that scenario, are you talking about, the commands that we sent, they're verified part of or they agree with our gold standard, right? Then we ran our pre-check, whatever the change was we were about to do, the loopback interface wasn't present. So then we ran the changes, but then for some reason the loopback interface didn't come up. The results we were expecting we didn't get, so we're going to roll back and remove the loopback interface. And if we're talking about the loopback still, could be anything, right? So it passes all the checks, we execute, but we're still not seeing what we thought we should see. So let's roll back and get back to a safe place.
That's correct.
Okay,
yep.
That's
absolutely
really
correct.
cool.
Yeah. We think so. I mean, and again, if we're going to scale automation, network automation, this is table stakes, man. We've got to have anything that does any change over the network needs to have some safety and security parameters before and after. And so we look at validation as like, syntax and CLI checking, making sure it doesn't violate a standard. And then the pre-checks and the post-checks can do operational stuff. Like, is the network looking like it needs to look like in order to make this change, and does the network correctly reflect the network change, and doing things operationally as pre-checks and post-checks as well. So being able to do all of that is critical.
So if I have a mixed vendor environment, can Itential help me manage that, right? Like if I want to put a loopback interface on a Cisco router versus a Juniper MX, it's going to be a very different set of commands to verify, put the interface on there, and then verify again, right? So Itential can help me no matter what's going on in my environment.
Yeah. And you've correctly said that, that those two CLI environments are completely different. So, I would build a second golden config tree that's specific to Junos. But the same rules might apply, right? So if I might have like core routers that are Junos routers and iOS routers in Atlanta. So I might still have a similar set of rules, standards for what those things need to look like, descriptions, IP address, things like that. And so I would just, build the golden configuration in Junos, Junos CLI versus the CLI and the other one, the Cisco one. And then within the automation, your command templates would be leveraging different CLI commands as well. But it's this, all of the same elements would be there for you to do that in a mixed environment for sure. Yep. And again, like you could actually encapsulate multiple pre-check conditions into a completely completely different workflow as well, and call that workflow from here. We call it child jobs. So that's how we kind of do modular workflows. Let me show you that actually. If I go to the third step of the demo, so where we started from was the humble little NetMiko Python script. We kind of surrounded it with our post-check, our pre-check, our validation, and now we're adding a little bit more to it. We're adding ServiceNow and Jira. So you see this is a child job. This is actually running another independent workflow. And this is our internally, like within Itential when we do demos. We have so many customers, they may have ServiceNow, they may have Jira. From a messaging perspective, they may be using Slack or MS Teams or email. So we've built these modular workflows where we can actually send the same, we can take the core data for what we're doing. So if we're going to open a ServiceNow ticket, we want to populate it with like a description of what we're doing. We can take that same data and split it into ServiceNow and Jira. So we can cover all in the same demo, we can say, yeah, we can do ServiceNow. Yeah, we can do Jira. Actually, anything that you integrate into the system becomes, API callable in a sense. And so we can integrate with all these things. Let's show you in a modular workflow how we can do all the things. Not that they would, although we've had some customers say, hey, for, network operations uses this, and the network engineers team uses this, and managers like email. So can you for this one event, can you send it out to all these different things? And the answer is like, yeah, we can.
So network engineers can get the Slack message, and then managers can get the email that everything finished successfully.
So we added ServiceNow, Jira into this, being able to also integrate. In this case, we're using MS Teams. We can start to build integrations into sources of truth like Netbox and info blocks. So Netbox becomes a part of this. And now you can see where we're expanding this thing out, right? We started with a script. We added some safety measures around it so we can run it in an enterprise, scaled out enterprise way. And now we can start to build out. And again, I always think about like, how hard would this be if I had to write the code to integrate just Netbox? Nonetheless, ServiceNow, Jira, email, Teams, all of that. And basically, it's essentially, dragging and dropping some stuff into a workflow here and filling out some forms. And then as we close this thing out, we have the ability to do stuff like create DNS entries if you want. In this case, also, I think we've added, if you're going to create a new service, maybe there's a firewall. So then maybe now we need to open something up on a Cisco ASA firewall to allow the service through. Otherwise, you can provision the network all day long, but the guy on the other end is never going to see it. So building in all of these things, and I think this really widens the view of the network practitioner, right? Because in their world, they're looking strictly at what do the scripts do? How do I work these things? And now really the world gets a lot bigger once you get it into the platform. And now it's like, okay, we've solved the problem of running scripts. We've solved the problem of running the scripts safely and validating, checking, rollbacks, reverts, things like that. And now it's like, okay, what is the other stuff before I even run the script that I have to do? And everybody says, yeah, I hate doing tickets. I hate doing tickets, you know? If you could just make it easier to open and fill out and update tickets, and that's kind of that broader vision of what we can do in the platform. But if I came to you, AJ, and said, hey, we can do this whole thing today, and you could do it, this would be a bit overwhelming, right?
Right.
Like, how do I do it? But that's why this is a journey. And as a practitioner myself, growing up, you know, as a network engineer, and a lot of my jobs revolving around that until I went to the dark side of, you know, the vendor side, SEs, and now I do hold the title of marketing something or other. The most evil of the evil, right? I still am a fairly technical guy, and I still hold true to my network engineering roots and advocate for that, because they're not ready to encompass all that as easy as we could show it to them. They need to start somewhere that's relevant to where they're at. And that's why it's so important. All right, so let's run this part of the demo. So this third part of the demo, which includes all of the integrations that we've done with all these different systems. So if I click play and then go over to Job Manager, we can see that the task has started, and now it's asking us for input, just like it has in the last one, in the last demo. In this case, we've got less data, Tim. This form actually has less data than before. And the reason why is consider the fact that now at some point we want maybe non-network engineers. I know this is scary, AJ, non-network engineers to run this. But think about where we've been. We've put all these guardrails in. We should feel fairly good that we've put all these checks in to make sure that data is the input for the data is validated, verified, pre-checks, post-checks. So at some point, this could be part of a catalog of services that somebody could run outside of the network team, could be part of a bigger automation that's bringing some service up. In this case, we're going to build some of the network intelligence into the framework of the automation itself. So instead of somebody who's not a networking person trying to figure out which core router this loopback needs to be put on, we as network engineers should put that into the logic of the workflow, right? And there's a couple of, how would you do that normally, right? If I have 4 routers and I could put the service on any 4 routers, you probably have some logic to go, maybe I should go every router 1, 2, 3, 4, then the next one be 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4. Or maybe I load one up and load the next one up, or maybe I load one and the other, then one and the other. Whatever your logic is, build that in, and the customer just simply, or the end user, or the customer, simply just needs to pick where he wants it, right? So remember, again, this may be a non-networking person. And the only other thing we really want from them is a port description is really where this is going to go, but it could be something like, just give me a description of the service, or give me an ID of the customer or the service this is a part of. And we could even append that to the ATL service or whatever the format is for the standard that's going to be part of that loopback interface. So we're just making this very, very, very simple for the end user, because they may not be a networking person. And we're building that logic in so that we can conform it to pick the right router, to pick the IP address. And in this case, the IP address can be coming from a system now and not from us. So we can go to like Netbox and pull an IP from there.
So yeah, you could automate this to the point where you're checking in with info blocks for the next available IP. You know, you as the network engineer, you don't care what it is. You just want the next available. So we're going to go to our source of truth, pull an available IP, put it into the automation.
Precisely. So that changes, the amount of data that we need. So we're really doing more data gathering inside the workflow by integrating with all these different systems. And that's the key. So it's actually running through the entire process, but right at the very beginning, it sent us a Teams notification. So right here is the latest one. Yep, that's the right one at our time. And inside of that modular workflow that I explained earlier, that can do like ServiceNow and Jira ticket creation simultaneously. Actually can do email too. I think it actually did spit an email out. But we actually can now embed the ServiceNow ticket that we've created in the workflow right into the Microsoft Teams notification and the Jira ticket as well. So just illustrating, this is where network automations eventually get to. And think about the time savings that you get from now integrating all these systems, even if it's just Netbox or some sort of source of truth or IPAM system, all the different time savings for the network engineer, just by integrating these things together. And again, so here's the Jira. So we integrated with Teams as a notification, showed you ServiceNow, showed you Jira, and then all those other systems we've integrated with, it's kind of going through that process as well. Ultimately, running our little humble script right in the middle of the whole thing to create a loopback interface. And I think that's a nice little way to illustrate the journey, And here's what's really interesting about that. You remember, I don't know, Sesame Street, there was this little game, like one of these things is not like the other.
Yeah.
Okay, so which one of these tasks is not like the other now that we've built this thing out? It's this guy right here, our script. And so now the final question is like, so in the journey, it's like my whole world was this script, this Python script that I held so near and dear. That was my whole world. And now I've brought it into Itential's platform, and we've been able to do all this stuff to it. And now I'm looking at it going, why do I even need to run this script? Is there some native way to do this that I don't have to actually run an external script to do a simple, interface create? And yes, you could do an iOS command, right? And we could format the whole thing inside a task that's native to our platform.
Very cool.
And that's the end of the journey, right? You start here, you end up here, and then you kind of recollect and go and look back and go, I don't even need this simple task right now. But the cool thing is there's a place for it. There's a place for it inside the platform. And even if you have somebody who is like the awesome super Python network guy, like that unicorn, there's a place for him here as well, using his scripts, because maybe he is integrating a bunch of things into his scripts. That's fine. You don't have to do that here, but it's probably a better place to do your guardrails here, especially if I have an application dedicated to building golden configurations. That way, whoever's writing these scripts doesn't have, are they even going to know what the standards are? Are they going to keep up with the standards?
Right.
And so now building that together makes a lot of sense. So you can use what you've got, you can continue to use what you got, or you can kind of migrate it over to a fully native Itential automation workflow.
See, I think I would lose my Itential privileges pretty quickly because I'd start automating GIFs into my Teams messages to my managers.
Yeah, it's pretty flexible enough. You could do that.
That would be a great way to show status of the job, right? Like, if it finished successfully, spit out this GIF. If it didn't, spit out this one.
There you go.
Got to keep it fun.
Yeah, I mean, we have some internal hackathons that we host internally just to teach people how to use how to use the platform. And so we can build integrations to anything, to any system using Open API spec. Or Postman collection. So it's just a collection of API calls and how they're defined and what's required, the kind of what's the required data that you need to feed the API call, and then a format for what it looks like when it spits out the data on the other side. And, when we open it up, you can get all kinds of crazy integrations going on in there that have nothing to do with networking, It's pretty cool to see what people come up with.
I just really want to tie this together in really how feature rich, no pun intended, Rich, this platform and the different platforms within Itential can be, because it really brings a multifaceted approach to automation. It's the ability to bring in existing tools that you have, to your point, Rich, so you don't have to throw things away. You can bring work that you've already done into this orchestration platform, and then you can set those golden configurations to make sure that you stay compliant when you run your actual automations. And then the vast different APIs and things that you can connect with and bring in different workflows into a single automation is really cool. And I love the visual drag and drop workflows that you can follow along as it's going through. And it makes a lot of sense.
That's great. I appreciate that and the feedback. And, there's still a lot more in the platform, but again, this is the journey. We don't want to overwhelm network practitioners, network engineers. We want to meet them where they're at and showing them like how you can just get started and then grow this out is like one of the greatest ways we can educate people, you know, in how we do things and why we do things the way we do. And, you know, I think one of you said earlier, just having different people and different roles in the platform working on their own automations, using the tools and the systems, like, you know, choosing their own systems, IT systems and IPAMs and things like that. So it becomes important to be flexible enough to you know, leverage all of the entire IT ecosystem, scripts, systems, and things like that across all the different groups, just in networking and beyond. And so that's one of our core philosophies. Like, customers know what tools work best for them. Let's just do whatever we can to integrate quickly. And I know that's not one thing we hit upon, but you know, we do an exceptional job at doing integrations with all these different systems. It's codeless integration. You don't have to wait for us to generate an adapter. If the IT system has a defined API spec, Open API is probably the most popular, but Postman collection, you can literally drop the file into the platform and it will generate an integration with that system and immediately becomes available to be used. So any of those API calls can now be one of those boxes in a workflow.
All right. Well, he is Rich Martin, Senior Technical Marketing Engineer at Itential. Rich, where can people find more of you? Are you on Twitter, LinkedIn?
That's a good question. Am I on LinkedIn? I don't do a lot of work in the Twitter sphere, but you can find a majority of my work. I do a lot of blog posts. I do a lot of demonstrations, all of that, you know, obviously on itential.com, where you can get a lot of my work and a lot of my examples. I do a lot of technical demos as well. And you can always reach me there as well at itential.com. And happy to reach out, talk to you, help customers, help potential customers, all of that.
And you recently participated in Networking Field Day 27. So what we're going to do is we will drop a link in the description of this video to Networking Field Day 27, so you can watch all of Rich's presentations there. We're also going to drop a link, if you missed it, to episode 82 of the Art of Network Engineering podcast, so you can listen to our podcast with Peter Spergata, VP of Marketing at Itential. And if you like what you saw today, hit the like button. Make sure you go to our channel and subscribe to the Art of Network Engineering YouTube channel. And join us again next time.